10 mothers, 10 homes, 23 children who trusted the woman who tucked them in at night. Every single one of these women had a husband or a boyfriend walking out the door. Every single one decided that the best way to hurt that man was not to leave him, not to take him to court, not to burn his name on the internet. The best way, in their minds, was to take the children. Not some of the children, all of them. Some used a knife from their own kitchen, one used a bathtub, one used a gun she bought at a store 5 days earlier, one bought rat poison at a taxi rank, one drove a minivan off a boat ramp, one smothered her kids and drove their bodies 90 miles to deliver them to the father herself. These are the 10 most cold-blooded cases on record of mothers who killed their children to break their ex-husband. Starting with the quietest one. Section 1. Brandy Worley, the Indiana mother who said, "Now you can't take the kids from me." On the night of November 16, 2016, a small town in central Indiana called Darlington was quiet. It was a town where most people knew each other by name, a town about 40 miles outside of Indianapolis, where the streets were calm, the houses were simple, and the lives inside them looked ordinary. Inside one of those houses, a family of 4 was getting ready for bed. Jason Worley, a software engineer, was the father. Brandy Worley, a 30-year-old mother, was his wife. Tyler Worley, 7 years old, was their son. Charlie Worley, 3 years old, was their daughter. Tyler was a first grader at Sugar Creek Elementary. He liked sports, he liked meeting new people. His father later said he could walk into a room full of strangers and walk out with 20 new friends. Charlie had just started taking dance lessons and gymnastics. She liked dressing up. She liked when her dad braided her hair. That evening, the whole family had gone to Charlie's dance practice over in Crawfordsville, and then they had come home and eaten supper together like they always did. Before the sun came up the next morning, 2 of those 4 people would be gone, and the other 2 would never live a normal life again. Brandy and Jason met when they were in high school. They started dating in 2001. They got engaged, waited a couple of years, and then got married in August of 2009. Their first child, Tyler, was born the same year they married. 4 years later, their daughter Charlie was born. From the outside, they looked like the kind of family everyone knows. Jason worked as a software engineer. Brandy stayed home with the children most of the time. Neighbours saw the kids in the yard. They saw Tyler heading off to school with his backpack. They saw Charlie getting into the car with her mum on the way to dance. Nothing about the family looked dangerous. Nothing about the house looked like a place where something terrible was about to happen. But underneath that normal surface, the marriage had been cracking for a while. The cracks started with trust. Jason had found out at some point that Brandy had been involved with one of their neighbours. He was devastated. He confronted her. She denied parts of it at first, then the truth came out. They talked about separating more than once, but each time they stopped short of doing it. They told themselves they were staying together for the kids. They told themselves they could fix it. But trust, once it's broken like that, is very hard to put back together. And by the middle of November 2016, Jason had decided he couldn't keep pretending anymore. On November 15th, 2 days before the killings, he told Brandy he wanted a divorce. He filed the paperwork in Montgomery County the same week. This was not a threat. It was not something he said in the middle of an argument. It was a real legal step. He was done. The next day, Wednesday, November 16th, looked normal on the outside. Brandy spent the day with her mother and looked for a job. The family went to Charlie's dance practice in Crawfordsville that evening. They came home and had supper. Tyler had a school project coming up. At some point that night, Brandy told Jason she needed to run out to Walmart to pick up pipe cleaners for it. That was the story. But according to what prosecutors later laid out in court, pipe cleaners were not what she went to buy. She drove to the Walmart in Crawfordsville and she bought a heavy combat knife, the kind of large fixed blade knife made by a company called K-Bar. She brought it home. She hid it in Tyler's bedroom where no one would notice. And then she came back out and acted like nothing had happened. That night, the couple played with the kids in the living room on a pull-down bed they had, what's called a Murphy bed. It was something the kids loved doing with them. Jason put the children to bed. Brandy told him he could sleep on the couch if he wanted. He said no. He didn't want to sleep in their bed, and he didn't want to sleep on the couch either. He went for a walk to clear his head. Then he went down to the basement to sleep. That decision, the decision to sleep downstairs, is probably the only reason Jason Worley is still alive. Around 4:30 in the morning on November 17th, Brandy Worley got up. The children were asleep. She went and got the knife she had hidden. According to what she later told police, and what the prosecutor, Joseph Boozer, laid out in court, she led Tyler into Charlie's bedroom. She told him there was going to be a sleepover in there. Something woke Charlie up. The 3-year-old asked her mother what she was doing. Brandy told her to go back to sleep. A few minutes later, both children were dead. Brandy then tried to take her own life with the same knife. She was not successful. She also took a large amount of Benadryl. That didn't finish the job either. What she did next is one of the most disturbing parts of this whole case. She called her mother. She told her mother what she had done. Her own mother told her to hang up the phone and dial 911. So she hung up. Then she called 911 in the calmest voice you can imagine. She sounded like someone calling about a package that didn't show up. The dispatcher picked up. Brandy said in a flat voice that she had stabbed herself and killed her 2 children. The dispatcher could not believe what she was hearing. She asked Brandy to repeat it. Brandy repeated it. The dispatcher asked her why. Brandy said her husband wanted a divorce. She said he wanted to take her kids. She said she didn't want him to have them. She told the dispatcher the police could come and get her and that she wouldn't put up a fight. At one point in the call, she mentioned that she had taken a lot of Benadryl. By the time deputies from the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office pulled up to the house, Brandy's mother had already driven over. The grandmother walked into the bedroom upstairs. She found Tyler and Charlie. She screamed. Her screams were what finally woke Jason Worley up in the basement. He came running up the stairs. He saw his mother-in-law crying. He saw Brandy standing in the living room bleeding from her neck. And that is when, according to what Jason told the court later, Brandy turned to him and said the sentence that the entire country would eventually remember. "Now you can't take the kids from me." Jason stood in that living room and tried to process what he had just walked into. The house was still the same house it had been the night before. The Murphy bed was still out. The kids' toys were still where they had been at bedtime, and his 2 children were gone. Deputies arrived and took Brandy into custody. She was taken to Indiana University Health Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis to be treated for the wounds to her neck, which took more than a week to recover from. Tyler and Charlie's bodies were taken to Terre Haute Regional Hospital for the autopsies. Sheriff Mark Castile spoke to reporters later that day. He said he had never seen anything like this. He said the house had never been a problem before. Brandy had no criminal history. There had been no calls to the home. There had been no reports of abuse. There was nothing at all that would have told anyone this was coming. The funeral for Tyler and Charlie was held at the Darlington Community Center on November 22nd, 2016, the day before Thanksgiving. Hundreds of people showed up. The children were buried at Green Lawn Cemetery, right there in Darlington, the little town where they had lived their whole short lives. A few months later, in March 2017, the divorce between Jason and Brandy was finalized. They have not spoken since the night before the killings. The case went through the legal system. At first, Brandy pleaded not guilty. Her lawyers were thinking about using an insanity defense. But in January 2018, she changed her mind and pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder. On March 19, 2018, Brandy Worley stood in the Montgomery Circuit Court in front of Judge Harry Siamas for sentencing. She wore beige jail clothes. Her feet were shackled. Prosecutor Joseph Boozer laid out every step of what she had done that night. Jason Worley took the stand and told the judge about his son and daughter. He talked about Tyler's personality, how easy it was for him to make friends. He talked about Charlie's love of dancing and getting her hair braided. He said the children were his life. When the judge asked him what sentence he wanted, Jason said all he wanted was to never see Brandy again. Brandy did not speak. Her defense attorney, Mark Inman, told the court he could not explain what she had done. He said there was no history of abuse in the home, no warning signs, nothing. He said she had lived 30 years without a single incident, and then something had snapped. Judge Siamas handed down his ruling. He sentenced her to 55 years for the murder of Tyler and 65 years for the murder of Charlie to be served back to back, a total of 120 years. For a woman in her early 30s, that is the rest of her life. Brandy Worley is now at the Indiana Women's Prison in Indianapolis. Jason Worley lives with the knowledge that a single decision, filing those divorce papers, was the thing his wife decided to punish him for, and that she chose to punish him by taking the two people in the world he loved the most. He has said in interviews that he hopes to never hear her name again. For everyone else who followed this case, the part that lingers is the sentence Brandy said in the living room after her husband came upstairs. "Now you can't take the kids from me." It captures, in 9 words, exactly why this happened, and exactly what kind of thinking leads a mother to do what she did. Not confusion, not some mystery the court couldn't solve, a decision. A decision to make sure that if the marriage was ending, the children went with it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Brandy Worley at least let her husband live to grieve his children. The next mother we're looking at didn't stop at killing her kids. She made sure her husband's girlfriend was on the list too, and she wrote a suicide note promising him he would feel pain and shame for the rest of his life. Section 2. Jessica Edens, the mother who left a note telling her husband to live with pain forever. On July 13, 2017, in the late afternoon, a 36-year-old mother named Jessica Edens drove from her home in Easley, South Carolina, into downtown Greenville. In the back seat of her Jeep were her 2 children. Hayden King was 9 years old. He had just finished 3rd grade at Forest Acres Elementary School and was going to be a rising 4th grader in the fall. Harper Edens was 5. She was supposed to start kindergarten in a few weeks. Both kids were in the car with their mother as she drove through Greenville traffic. They had no idea where they were going. They had no idea that in the front seat, hidden from them, was a handgun their mother had stolen from her own parents the day before. They had no idea that in about 30 minutes, a woman they had never met was going to be dead in a parking garage, and that their mother had already made the decision that before the night was over, they would be dead too. Jessica Edens, on paper, looked like the kind of woman nobody would ever worry about. She was born in Poughkeepsie, New York, on January 22, 1981. Her parents were Michael and Leslie Mitchell. She had a sister named Diane and 2 stepbrothers. She had gone to Greenville Tech for school. She ran a photography business out of her home. She mostly photographed newborns and families. On her own website, she called herself a Greenville-based photographer, a mother of 2 precious children, and a wife to the most wonderful man. She had a following on Facebook. She was popular with other photographers. She had even travelled to Oregon the year before for a workshop. She knitted little bonnets and teddy bears for newborn photo shoots. She loved iced coffees from Starbucks. She was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and fit in anywhere. That was the Jessica people saw, and that was the person who drove her 2 children into Greenville that Thursday afternoon to do what she had planned to do. The story of how she got to that afternoon starts with her marriage. In 2008, Jessica met a man named Benjamin Edens. She already had a son at that point, Hayden, born in November 2007. Hayden's father was not Ben, but Ben came into his life early and became the only dad he ever knew. Jessica and Ben got married in 2010. 2 years later, in July 2012, their daughter Harper was born. Harper was the child Ben and Jessica had together. The family lived in Easley, a town about 10 miles west of Greenville. For a few years, the marriage looked solid. Jessica built her photography business. Ben went to work. The kids were healthy. And then, sometime in the spring of 2017, everything fell apart. By April of that year, the marriage was over. Ben had moved out. He had moved into an apartment complex in downtown Greenville called the Bookends. He filed for divorce. Jessica was furious. She believed Ben had been having an affair with a woman at his job for about a year. Ben's job was connected to international paper. So was the woman Jessica suspected. Her name was Meredith Lee Rahm. Meredith was 28. She had grown up in Tennessee, graduated from the University of Memphis with a degree in international business, and moved to Greenville in 2015. She lived in the same apartment complex where Ben had just moved. Police would later say the exact nature of their relationship was not fully clear, but that the two of them knew each other from work and that people described them as acquaintances. Jessica did not believe that. Jessica believed Meredith was the woman who had ended her marriage. From that point on, Jessica started a campaign against Meredith that the police were actually aware of before anyone died. Meredith called the Greenville Police Department twice in the weeks leading up to July 13th. She told them Jessica was sending her harassing texts, making phone calls, and posting about her online. Jessica had gone on a website designed for people to shame others who they believed had broken up marriages, and she had posted Meredith's photo there with nasty captions. Meredith asked the police how she could get a restraining order. Officers talked to her about her options. They did not think she was in danger exactly. They thought it was harassment. They had no idea what Jessica was really planning. The custody fight made everything worse. Ben was only the biological father of Harper, the younger child. Jessica was Hayden's only legal parent. So the fight in family court was over Harper. Jessica wanted sole custody of her daughter. Ben wanted joint custody. On July 11th, 2 days before the shootings, Ben filed an affidavit in court saying that Jessica was using the children as a weapon against him. He said she was refusing to let him see or even speak to Harper. The custody hearing that week did not go the way Jessica wanted. According to Pickens County investigators, that hearing was the moment Jessica started putting together a plan. The plan was not just to kill herself. The plan was to make sure her husband would spend the rest of his life suffering. On the night of July 12th, the night before it all happened, Ben got worried. Jessica had been sending him text messages that disturbed him. He called the Easley police and asked them to check on his daughter. An officer drove over to Jessica's home. He knocked. Jessica answered. Behind her, Hayden and Harper were sitting on the couch eating popcorn and watching a movie. Everything looked normal. Jessica even told the officer calmly that she was planning to expose her husband in court and expose the woman he had been seeing for the past year. The officer saw no red flags, no sign that anything bad was about to happen. He left. Jessica put the kids to bed, and then, at some point that same night, she drove to her parents' house while they were out of town. She let herself in. She took a .40 caliber handgun out of their house. She brought it home. She went to sleep. The next day, July 13th, Jessica put the kids in the Jeep. She drove them into downtown Greenville. She pulled into the parking garage at the Bookends apartment complex where Ben lived. She parked on the 3rd floor. Meredith Rahm was also at the garage. She was in her own car. Jessica walked up to Meredith's vehicle with the handgun and shot her. Meredith died right there in the driver's seat. Hayden and Harper were in Jessica's Jeep during all of it. Jessica then got back in her Jeep with her 2 children and drove out of the parking garage. She drove 7 miles west, back toward Easley. Her destination was the Greenville Pickens Speedway, a racetrack in that area. She pulled the Jeep up against a chain-link fence at the speedway. She locked the doors. She left the engine running. And she called Ben one last time. According to records obtained by the Greenville News, what she said to him on that final call was this: "Everyone you love is gone. Do you hear me? I'm about to be gone too." Then she hung up. Then she did what she had been planning for days. About 2 hours after Meredith's body was found in Greenville, a driver noticed the Jeep sitting at the speedway with its engine running. Pickens County deputies came out. They looked inside. All 3 people in the Jeep, Jessica, Hayden and Harper, had each been shot once. The same handgun was on the seat. It was the same gun that had been used to kill Meredith Rahm 2 hours earlier. And inside the vehicle, investigators found 3 handwritten notes. Jessica had written them in advance. 2 of the notes were for her own family. One was for her parents, one was for her sister. Both notes had the same tone. She was sorry. She was sorry for the pain she was causing them. She loved them. She didn't want them to hurt. The 3rd note was different. The 3rd note was for Ben, and the 3rd note was not sorry about anything. Jessica began it by addressing him directly. She told him he had caused her more pain than she had ever been in her life. She told him he had caused her children pain. She told him she hated him. She told him she hoped he would rot one day for what he had done to her and the kids. She said the children could no longer be hurt by him. She said they were at peace. And then she finished with one sentence that summed up everything she had done that day. "I hope you live with pain and shame and guilt for the rest of your life." That sentence is the reason this case is remembered. Jessica Edens did not kill her 2 children because she was confused. She did not kill them because she had lost her mind. She killed them because she had made a choice about what would hurt her husband the most, and she had decided that taking his daughter away from him forever, and taking away the boy he had raised as his own son since he was an infant, was the answer. Pickens County Chief Deputy Creed Hash said it plainly in the days after. Text messages and other written material, he said, showed that Jessica had spent the last few days developing a plan that she believed would cause everlasting consequences for her husband. Everlasting meaning forever, a wound that would never heal. That is what she wrote in the note. That is what she put in motion when she stole the gun from her parents. That is why she drove into Greenville with the children in the back seat, instead of leaving them with a babysitter, or with her mother, or with anyone else. In the days that followed, the community of Easley tried to absorb what had happened. Hayden's principal at Forest Acres Elementary, Darian Bird, spoke about him to local reporters. He said Hayden was the kind of kid who made other students want to come to school. He said he was going to be nice to them, smile at them, and make them feel welcome. He called him the kind of kid you wished everyone was like. Hayden's 3rd grade teacher, Cindy Fogel, said he had a bright smile that lit up the room. Harper was supposed to start kindergarten at the same school that fall. Her classroom had already been assigned. She would never see it. Jessica's obituary was printed in the local paper a few days later. It listed her as a Greenville Tech graduate and a photographer. It listed her parents and her sister as survivors. It also listed Hayden and Harper. The obituary described them simply as the late Hayden King and Harper Edens. No mention of how they died. No mention of what their mother had done to them. No mention of the note, because no obituary ever says that part. That part lives in police files and news reports, and in the memory of a man named Benjamin Edens, who had just wanted a divorce, and who instead lost his daughter, his stepson, and a woman he worked with, all in the span of about 2 hours on a Thursday afternoon. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Jessica Edens planned her revenge in days. Allison McConnell is the next mother we are looking at, and her revenge was slower. It built up over months of a bitter divorce, a custody fight across 2 continents, and a judge's ruling that told her she could not take her boys home to Australia. What she did to her husband in return became one of Canada's most talked about cases of the last 20 years. Section 3. Allison McConnell, the mother who left her wedding ring beside the children she drowned. Allison McConnell started her adult life the way a lot of young Australians do. She was in her late 20s, she was working a seasonal job, she was travelling. The year was 2006. Allison had grown up in a coastal town called Gosford, about an hour and a half north of Sydney, and she had come to Canada on what's called a working holiday visa. Her job was at the Delta Ski Resort in Kamloops, a town in British Columbia. That is where she met a man named Curtis McConnell. Curtis worked at the same resort. He was Canadian. They started dating. Within a few months, they were serious. Within about a year, they were married. The wedding took place in Australia in January of 2007. That July, their first son Connor was born. They were still in Australia at the time of his birth. A little while after that, Curtis brought Allison and baby Connor back with him to Alberta, Canada. They bought a small house in a tiny village called Millet, about 40 kilometres south of Edmonton. It was a quiet place, farmland all around, a population of only about 2,000 people. On paper, Allison had done it. She had met a nice man, gotten married, had a baby, and bought a house. 3 years later, she would be on an Edmonton road with broken bones, and both of her children would be dead in a locked bathroom back home. The problem, for a long time before anyone saw it, was that Allison had never been okay. People who met her in Canada saw a smiling, quiet young woman. What they did not see was the childhood she had survived in Australia. Her history had been traumatic. She had been through serious harm as a teenager. She had attempted to end her own life more than once, starting at age 15 and again at 18. She came to Canada hoping the distance would help her leave all that behind. For a while, it seemed like it had. Curtis loved her. She had a child. She was living in a country where none of the people who had hurt her could reach her. But trauma like what Allison had lived through does not disappear just because you move away from where it happened. It waits. And when a new stress comes along, it comes back. For the first couple of years of their marriage, things looked good enough on the outside. Allison worked for an oil company in Leduc, a town close to Millet. Curtis worked at a hardware store. Connor was a happy toddler. In March of 2009, their second son, Jaden, was born. Allison later said in court that she had not planned to have a second child. The pregnancy had caught her off guard, and within weeks of Jaden being born, the marriage started to come apart. By April 2009, a month after Jaden's birth, Curtis moved down into the basement of the house. He was still living under the same roof, but he was not sleeping upstairs anymore. He was not sleeping in the same bed. Allison became upset. She became depressed. She was taking care of a newborn and a toddler while her husband slept in the basement and barely spoke to her. In December 2009, Curtis took the next step. He filed for divorce. He moved out of the house entirely and in with his parents. The marriage was over. For most women going through a divorce, that would have been the worst part. For Allison McConnell, the worst part came next. She wanted to take the boys back to Australia with her. She wanted to go home. She wanted her mother, her family, her country. Curtis said no. He was not going to let her take his two sons to the other side of the planet, where he would barely see them. The couple ended up in front of a judge over it, and in late 2009, about 3 months before the boys died, a judge ruled in Curtis's favour. The boys had to stay in Canada. Allison could not take them to Australia. If she wanted to leave, she could leave, but she would have to leave without them. That ruling is the moment everything changed. Allison's mother-in-law, a woman named Audrey McConnell, testified later in court that before that point, she and Allison had been close. They saw each other almost every day. Audrey said Allison was a good mother who cared for her boys well. But after the judge's ruling, Audrey said, Allison did what she called an absolute 180. She pulled away. She stopped visiting. She got angry. She stayed angry. Audrey said it was an Allison she did not recognise. In the last week of January 2010, Allison started doing things that in hindsight should have been massive warning signs. She got on her family computer. She typed a question into the search bar. How long does it take to drown? She searched for how long strangulation takes. She searched for how many sleeping pills it takes to overdose. She also started trying to give things away. Car seats, cameras, a computer. The kind of things a person gives away when they know they are not going to need them anymore. On Friday, January 29, 2010, Allison took the boys on a playdate. They went to a pool in Leduc to swim with other mums and kids. That was the last time anyone outside the family saw Connor and Jaden alive. Sometime over that weekend, between Friday night and Monday morning, Allison drowned her two sons in the bathtub of the family home. The police later could not say exactly when. She was later unable to say either. She told the court she remembered taking the boys swimming. She remembered getting them ready for bed that night. After that, her memory went blank. She had been drinking and taking pills, she said, and from that point forward, she could not tell investigators what happened. What the physical evidence told investigators was this. The bodies of Connor and Jaden were in the bathtub when they were found. The water was cold. The boys were floating among their plastic bath toys. Police found electrical appliances, a hairdryer and a hair iron that had been plugged in and dropped into a different tub of water in the house. There were empty pill bottles and alcohol bottles on the floor. There was a rope tied to a beam in the basement ceiling. It looked like Allison had tried multiple ways to end her own life after the boys were gone, and each attempt had failed. And then she did one more thing before she left the house. She took off her wedding ring. She placed it carefully on top of the toilet seat, right next to the bathtub where the children were. She left it there for Curtis to find. Then she got in her car and drove north to Edmonton. She parked her vehicle in the lot of a Toys R Us on the south side of the city. She walked over to the Delta Hotel nearby and ordered a meal. She sat and ate. She became emotional in the restaurant. She got up, left, and walked to an overpass where a road called Calgary Trail crosses over another road called White Mud Drive. Calgary Trail is up high. White Mud is a busy 4-lane freeway underneath. Allison climbed up and she jumped off. She landed in the eastbound lanes of White Mud Drive. Traffic was moving below her. She survived the fall, but broke multiple bones. Emergency crews got to her and took her to the hospital. Meanwhile, Curtis McConnell was at his job in Wetaskiwin, the nearest bigger town to Millet. A police officer in Edmonton called him on his phone. The officer told him his wife had fallen from an overpass and was in the hospital. The officer did not know anything about where the children were. Curtis asked him. The officer said he had no idea. Curtis immediately left work and drove to the house in Millet. When he walked in, the television was on and loud. He called out for the boys. No one answered. He walked through the house. The bathroom door on the upper floor was shut. He tried the handle. It was locked from the inside. He went and got a knife and used it to pop the lock open. The door swung in, and in front of him, Curtis McConnell saw the two most important people in his life floating in cold bath water. He later told the court he fell to his knees. He said he could smell them. He said he reached into the water and it was so cold his hands hurt. He pulled his boys out of the tub. He ran out of the house and grabbed a neighbour and asked him to come inside and look, because he thought maybe he was imagining the whole thing. He was not. And on his way back in, Curtis saw something he would never forget. On top of the toilet seat, right next to the bathtub, was his wife's wedding ring. Allison McConnell was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. Her trial took place in Wetaskiwin in 2012. She pleaded not guilty. In an agreed statement of facts, she admitted to drowning the boys, but her defence argued that because she was so depressed and so full of alcohol and pills at the time, she could not have formed the mental intent that the murder charge required. The prosecutor, a Crown lawyer named Gordon Hatch, told the judge this was not really a mystery. He said Allison had killed her 2 sons as an act of revenge against her husband. He said the judge's ruling that she could not take the boys to Australia had pushed her over the edge, and she had decided that if Curtis was not going to let her have the boys, he was not going to have them either. The wedding ring on the toilet seat, Hatch said, proved it. That was not a random thing. That was a message to Curtis. That was a way of saying, look what you made me do. The judge, Justice Michelle Crichton, did not agree that the prosecution had proven that level of intent. In April 2012, she delivered her verdict. She acquitted Allison of second-degree murder and convicted her instead of the lesser charge of manslaughter. The judge said there was a black hole in the evidence where no one could say for sure what Allison's mental state was in the moment she put her boys in the water. She said Allison deserved the benefit of that doubt. 2 months later, in June 2012, Crichton sentenced Allison McConnell to 6 years in prison. But because Allison had already spent time in a psychiatric hospital before the trial, and because the law in Canada at the time allowed for double credit on pre-trial custody, she only had 15 months left to serve. In reality, she ended up serving only about 10 more months. Curtis McConnell was in the courtroom for the sentencing. He wept outside afterward. His father, Jim McConnell, stood in the hallway in front of reporters. He asked what was going to stop anyone from killing kids now if this was all the law was going to do. Curtis told reporters that after looking at everything, he believed his wife had done what she did to hurt him. He pointed to the wedding ring on the toilet seat again. He said she had left the boys there for him to find. He said she had so much anger toward him that she could not let it go any other way. He filed a civil lawsuit against her for $940,000 Canadian on behalf of the children. Audrey McConnell, the boys' grandmother, gave a victim impact statement in court that broke a lot of people in the room. She talked about cleaning a set of patio doors in her house one day after the boys had died and realising partway through that she was wiping away one of her grandson's handprints. Sticky little finger marks from a toddler. She said she stopped cleaning. She stood there and cried for days because she realised there would never be new handprints on those doors. The judge said no one who heard Audrey speak would ever forget it. Allison was held at Alberta Hospital, a psychiatric facility in Edmonton. In April 2013, after serving only 15 months total, she was released. The Canadian government deported her straight to Australia. The Crown was not done. They were appealing the manslaughter verdict. They wanted Allison brought back to Canada so they could retry her on the second-degree murder charge. That appeal was scheduled for October of that year. She never made it to the appeal. In September 2013, a member of the public walking near a bridge on the New South Wales coast, a bridge called the Brian McGowan Bridge in West Gosford, found a body on the rocks below. Police confirmed it was Allison McConnell. Her lawyer said she had ended her own life. She was 34 years old. She was buried in Australia. Her appeal was dropped. Her file was closed. Curtis McConnell is still alive. He is raising no children. He walked into a locked bathroom one afternoon in February 2010, expecting to find his sons playing with their bath toys. Instead, he found them in cold water, with his wife's wedding ring on the toilet seat 3 feet away. That image does not leave a person. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Allison at least went quiet when the marriage ended. She waited. She planned. She acted. The next mother we are looking at did something different. She killed her 2 little children, smothered them in their beds, and then personally delivered their bodies to the town where she had once lived with their father. She parked the car around the corner from his house, got out, and walked into the police station to tell them what she had done. Section 4. Fiona Donison, the mother who drove her dead children to her ex-partner's front door. Fiona Donison was not a young woman when all of this happened. She was 45 years old. She was English. She was educated. She had worked in the City of London for an insurance firm for years. She drove a silver Nissan Note. She wore nice clothes. She had been married before and divorced. She had 2 grown-up sons from that first marriage. By anyone's outside read, Fiona Donison was a middle-class woman living a middle-class life in the south of England. That is what made what she did, on a cold January night in 2010, so difficult for the country to understand. This was not a desperate teenage mother. This was not someone living in poverty with no options. This was a woman with a salary, with a car, with a house, with family around her. And yet, over the course of about 24 hours, she smothered her 2 small children in their beds, packed their bodies into sports holdalls, loaded them into the back of her car, and drove them 90 miles through the British countryside so that she could deliver them to their father's front door. Fiona met Paul Donison at the insurance firm where they both worked. Paul had also been married before. The 2 of them got together, fell for each other, and eventually moved in. They bought a house in a small town called Heathfield in East Sussex, which is in the south of England, not far from the coast. Paul eventually left the insurance job to do something else. Fiona kept commuting into London every day to work in the city. Their life on the surface was completely normal. They had the house, the dog kind of life, minus the dog. And in April of 2004, they had their first child, a little girl they named Mia. Mia died. She was 9 months old. The cause was listed as sudden, unexplained infant death, what people in Britain often call cot death. There was nothing obviously wrong with her. She had just gone to sleep one night and not woken up. That kind of loss can break a couple. It almost broke the Donisons, but they stayed together. 2 years after Mia died, in 2006, they had a son and named him Harry. 2 years after that, in 2008, they had a daughter and named her Elise. Harry and Elise were the second chance. They were the 2 children who were going to make it. By 2009, the relationship between Fiona and Paul was falling apart. No one is exactly sure why. Different people around them had different theories. What is clear is that Fiona became convinced, rightly or wrongly, that Paul was seeing another woman. The woman's name was Alison Shimmons. She was someone Paul had known years earlier. She was an old school friend. According to what came out in court later, Paul had in fact started a new relationship with her. Fiona found out or figured it out, and from that point on, something hardened inside her. In September of 2009, Paul came home from work one day in Windsor and found a note in the house. The note was from Fiona. She had taken the children and left, just like that. She moved them to a rental house in a village called Lightwater in Surrey, about 90 miles away from Heathfield. She took Harry, who was 3, and Elise, who was 2, and she set up a whole new life for herself in a town where Paul was not. Paul was worried. He contacted Sussex police, who got in touch with their counterparts in Surrey and asked them to do routine welfare checks on the children. He was worried enough that he told friends and officials he feared Fiona might hurt Harry and Elise. That fear is in the record. He warned people. No one moved fast enough. Between September 2009 and January 2010, Fiona also went to war with Paul in other ways. She filed a false assault allegation against him. She tried to claim the family home. She cut off his contact with the kids whenever she could. According to the prosecutor who handled the case, a woman called Christine Lang QC, Fiona spent those 4 months doing everything she could to make Paul's life a nightmare. The assault allegation and the custody games were part of the same project. The project was to ruin him. And when none of that worked, when Paul kept going, started seeing Allison, and seemed ready to move on, Fiona decided on something final. On Tuesday the 26th of January 2010, at her rented house in Lightwater, Fiona Donison put Harry and Elise to bed. Harry had on pyjamas with a character called Rory the racing car on them. Elise was in a pink romper suit. They fell asleep. At some point that night, while they were sleeping, Fiona went into their rooms and smothered them using their own bedding. The post-mortem later confirmed both children had died of asphyxiation. They had been dead for less than 24 hours by the time they were found. They did not wake up. They did not cry out. Neighbours heard nothing. What Fiona did next is the part of this case that separates it from almost every other case on this list. She did not just kill the children and sit with them. She did not try to end her own life right there. She made a plan. She packed her 2 little children into 2 separate large sports holdalls, the kind people use for gym kit. She carried the holdalls out to her silver Nissan Note and placed them in the boot. She went back into the house and got 2 kitchen knives. She put those in the car too. Then she got behind the wheel, started the engine, and drove. Her destination was 90 miles away, 90 miles through the English countryside, in the middle of the night, with her 2 children in the back in the holdalls. The house she was driving to was the one she had shared with Paul before she left him, the house in Heathfield. When she arrived, she got out. She left the children in the boot. She took the knives with her. She broke into the former family home. She went inside. She waited. According to what came out in court, her plan was to attack Paul when he came home that night. She was going to kill him too. And then, the prosecutor said, her plan was to blame him for the death of the children. The story she had in her head was that Paul would come through the door, she would attack him, the scene would look like a confrontation, and she would tell police that Paul had killed his own kids. That was the plan. Paul did not come home that night. No one knows exactly where he was. Fiona sat in the dark of that house for hours, holding 2 kitchen knives, waiting for a man who was never going to walk through the door. Eventually, she gave up. She came out of the house empty-handed. She went back to her car, where her 2 dead children were still in the boot, and she parked the vehicle a little ways away, around the corner from where Paul lived. At around 11 in the morning on Wednesday the 27th of January, a woman walked into the Heathfield police station. It was Fiona. She looked distressed. Her left wrist had a self-inflicted cut. She was unsteady on her feet. She had taken an overdose of sleeping tablets before walking in. She told the officers at the desk, plainly, that she had killed her children. She would not tell them where the children were. The police realised immediately they had a serious situation. They took her to the hospital, where staff overheard her screaming and then fainting. Back at the station, other officers started a frantic search for the car she had come in. It took them about 45 minutes to find the silver Nissan Note parked near the old family home. When they forced their way in and opened the boot, they found the 2 sports holdalls. They unzipped the first. They unzipped the second. Harry, aged 3, in his Rory pyjamas. Elise, aged 2, in her pink romper. Sussex police charged Fiona Donison with the murder of her 2 children. Her trial did not begin until the following year. In the meantime, psychiatrists examined her. They diagnosed her with narcissistic personality disorder. In plain language, that means she had an overblown sense of her own importance and what she was owed from the world. She believed rules did not apply to her in the same way they apply to other people. That diagnosis would come up later at trial. There was one more thing police found when they searched, a suicide note that Fiona had written. It was addressed to her 2 teenage sons from her first marriage. Fiona clearly believed she was going to be dead by the time anyone read it. The note said that by the time they were reading this, she would have gone to be with Harry, Elise and Mia. The part that told investigators everything they needed to know about her state of mind was what she wrote next. She apologised to her older boys for having chosen Paul at all. She wrote that Paul had made their lives miserable, that he had been a bad choice for all of them. She blamed Paul for everything, right up to and including her decision to suffocate the 2 children who had called him Dad. The trial was held at Lewes Crown Court, starting on the 12th of July 2011. Fiona pleaded not guilty. Her defence was that she had been suffering from severe depression and that she had no memory of killing the children at all. She said her memory just stopped at some point on the 26th of January and came back when she was in the hospital. She did not take the stand in her own defence. She just sat there. The prosecutor, Christine Lang QC, told the jury that this was a case of the ultimate revenge. She said Fiona had killed Harry and Elise because Paul had rejected her and started a new relationship, and because she could not stand that he was going to be happy without her. Fiona used the children, Lang said, as pawns, as weapons, to hurt a man she believed had wronged her. The defence tried to get the jury to reduce the charges to manslaughter based on the depression claim. The prosecution brought in a clinical psychologist called Dr. Sanya Kroljes. She had interviewed Fiona multiple times. Her conclusion was that Fiona was not genuinely unable to remember. She said Fiona was, in her professional opinion, lying about the amnesia. She pointed out that real psychological amnesia does not come and go in 2 sudden bursts the way Fiona described. She also said Fiona's behaviour in the psychiatric unit where she was being held did not match her claims of severe depression. Fiona said she could not sleep, but staff said she slept 8 hours most nights. Fiona scored severely depressed on written tests, but was able to run complicated computer programs and manage her time with no problem. Kroljes believed Fiona's narcissistic traits were so strong they were in fact a personality disorder. The jury listened. On the 9th of August 2011, the jury at Lewes Crown Court came back. They were unanimous. Guilty on both counts of murder. Fiona Donison refused to come into the courtroom to hear her own verdict read out. She stayed in her holding cell. The judge, Mr. Justice Nicol, sentenced her to life in prison, with a minimum term of 32 years before she could even apply for parole. That is one of the longest sentences given to a female offender in modern British history. The judge did not mince words. He said the killings had been deliberate. He said they had been wicked. He said the deaths were no accident. And he said this. He said Fiona had killed Harry and Elise, she who was their mother, and that why she did it defied logical explanation. It could only, he said, have something to do with her feelings for Paul Donison, the children's father, and her former partner. Outside the courthouse, Paul Donison spoke to reporters. He said what his family had gone through was almost unbearable. He said he felt the justice system in England had been biased toward the accused, that Fiona had been handled with what he called kid gloves. He had lost his first child Mia to cot death. He had lost Harry. He had lost Elise. He had warned the police in the months before the murders that he was worried his estranged wife might do something to the kids. And in the end, he had been right. Fiona Donison is still in prison in the United Kingdom. She will not be eligible for any kind of parole consideration until the year 2042, by which time she will be in her late 70s. The old family home in Heathfield, the home she broke into with 2 knives, waiting for Paul to come back, is someone else's house now. The sports holdalls are locked away in police evidence, and the note she wrote, the one she thought her older sons would read at her funeral, the one where she blamed Paul for everything, sits in court records, exactly where she left it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Fiona Donison at least used bedding. What the mother we are going to talk about next did to her two small children is one of the most violent family killings on record. She stabbed them to death in the middle of the day, and she did it because she could not stand that her ex-husband had moved on with another woman. Section 5. Amy Hebert, the Louisiana teacher's aide who could not stand that her husband was getting remarried. Amy Hebert's story does not start with a crime scene. It starts with what looked like a solid, decent, church-going Louisiana life. Amy was born Amy Talbot in a tiny community called Matthews in Lafourche Parish, in the southern part of the state, where the bayous run and everyone knows everyone at the grocery store. She grew up there. She never really left there. In August of 1991, at the age of about 25, she married a local man named Chad Hebert. 3 years later, in 1994, the couple bought a small one-storey house at 118 St. Anthony Street in Matthews. That address is important. That address is where everything would happen 13 years later. They settled in. They went to church. Amy was a devout Christian. She took her faith seriously, prayed regularly, and wanted to build a Christian home. In June of 1998, Amy gave birth to a daughter. They named her Camille Catherine Hebert. 2 years after that, in May of 2000, their son was born. They named him Braxton John Hebert. Camille was bright, bubbly, and loved school. She was the kind of little girl who couldn't wait to grow up. Braxton was quieter. He had a mild form of autism. He needed a little extra patience and a little extra structure. But he was funny, loving, and very attached to his mother and his big sister. The family of 4 lived at 118 St. Anthony Street with the family dog. Amy took a job as a teacher's aide at Lockport Lower Elementary School in the next town over. Braxton eventually went to Lockport Lower where his mum worked. Camille went to Lockport Upper, the elementary school for older kids. Everything about this family, from the outside, looked like something you'd see on a Christmas card. The crack started somewhere around 2005. The details of what exactly went wrong inside the marriage have never been made fully public, but what is known is that Chad Hebert was unhappy, and Amy was unhappy, and at some point that year, Chad filed for divorce. The divorce dragged on into 2006 and was finalised in April of that year. Chad moved out. He and Amy worked out a joint custody arrangement. Amy got primary physical custody of the children during the week. Chad got them on weekends and for holidays. The children passed back and forth between the two parents' homes, as millions of kids from divorced families do every week in America. That arrangement for a little while was working. What broke it was a woman named Kimberly Mendoza. Kimberly was a co-worker of Chad's. Sometime after the divorce, Chad and Kimberly started seeing each other. He did not hide it. The relationship got serious. By late 2007 and into 2008, Chad was planning to marry Kimberly. Amy found out, and Amy, who had been handling the divorce, the custody schedule, and the new reality of being a single mum in her early 40s, could not handle this part of it. The idea that her husband, the father of her 2 children, was going to replace her with another woman, bring that woman into his home, and let her be a stepmother to Camille and Braxton, broke something inside Amy that had been quietly fraying for 2 years. The first place it showed up was in the custody schedule. In June of 2007, about 2 months before what happened, Amy started refusing to let the children go to Chad's actual house. She would only let them visit at their grandmother's house, at Chad's mother's home. Chad's mother was named Julie Hebert. Amy told people the reason was that she didn't want her children exposed to Kimberly. That was the stated reason. The real reason, as prosecutors would later argue in court, was that Amy was trying to use the kids as a way to control Chad and punish him for moving on. She started returning the kids late after visits, which violated the custody order. She sent Chad harassing communications. Chad, for his part, started keeping notes. He started building a paper trail because he knew he was heading back into family court. He wanted to show a judge what he was dealing with. What neither of them knew was how short the timeline had become. Monday, August 20th, 2007 was supposed to be an ordinary Monday. Amy was due at work at Lockport Lower. The children were getting ready for school. The school year had just started. Camille had turned 9 earlier that summer. Braxton was 7. What happened inside that house on St. Anthony Street that morning is the kind of thing that is impossible to describe without being overwhelming, so the details will stay limited. What we know is this. Amy did not go to work. The children did not go to school. Amy went through the kitchen and she gathered knives. Investigators later counted 11 kitchen knives used during what happened next. Both children were attacked. They fought for their lives. The medical evidence later showed they both had defensive wounds on their hands and arms, which means they saw what was coming and they tried to protect themselves. Braxton was 7 years old and mildly autistic. Camille was 9. Their mother was a grown woman. They had no chance. The family dog was also killed in the utility room of the house. Amy then attacked herself with the same weapons. She injured herself roughly 30 times on her abdomen, chest, neck, and wrists. She was trying to end her own life. She was not successful. Then she did something that a lot of mothers in this category do. She moved the children. She carried them both into her own bedroom and placed them in her bed beside her. Investigators later determined, based on blood evidence, that the children had not actually been harmed in that bed. The attacks had taken place in other rooms. Amy had cleaned herself up at some point in the process, and after she had cleaned up, and after she had put the children in the bed with her, she sat down in a recliner in another room. She picked up a pen and a writing tablet, and she started writing letters. There were 2 letters. One was to Chad, her ex-husband. One was to Julie Hebert, his mother. Both letters are the reason the prosecution would later argue this was not a case of mental illness. Both letters are full of rage, and neither of them sounds anything like a person who doesn't know what they are doing. In the letter to Chad, Amy wrote a sentence that would later be shown on a giant poster in a Louisiana courtroom to the jury. She wrote that he had told her he wanted to move on with his life, and she told him to go ahead, but he was not getting the kids too. She went further. She told him that he could sell the family home and collect the children's life insurance money, and he could use that money, in her words, to buy some more. That is how she referred to her own son and daughter, who were lying in her bed in the next room, as 2 items that could be replaced with new ones at a store. The prosecutor, the district attorney of Lafourche Parish, a man named Camille Cam Morvant II, would later stand in front of the jury, point at that line, and say this is not the note of a psychotic person. This is the note of someone who is angry and who wants to hurt someone. Amy's hands had blood on them when she wrote the letters. Her bloody fingerprints were found on the tablet she wrote on. They were also found on a coffee pot in the kitchen and, according to reports from the scene, on a Bible in the house. She had picked up the Bible at some point during that morning. It had her fingerprints on it too. And then, after she was done writing, she lay down next to the children and waited to die. She did not die. What eventually brought the police was the most ordinary thing imaginable. Amy did not show up for work at Lockport Lower. A co-worker got concerned. That co-worker drove over to 118 St. Anthony Street to check on her. She knocked. No one answered. She called a family member. Word got to Chad. Chad called 911 and asked deputies to go check on his children. Chad's father, R.J. Buck Hebert, drove over to the house himself. Buck Hebert went inside. What that man saw in his daughter-in-law's bedroom is something he never recovered from. Lafourche Parish Sheriff's deputies arrived shortly after. Amy was still alive. They had to use a taser to subdue her and get her under control. She was loaded into an ambulance and rushed to Oxner St. Anne General Hospital in Raceland. Doctors there said her wounds were life-threatening. She was put in the intensive care unit. She survived. And the moment she was conscious and able to talk, she started talking. A registered nurse at the hospital named Claudette Bay took care of Amy on August 20th and again on August 22nd. Nurse Bay would later take the witness stand at the murder trial and tell the jury something important. She said Amy was alert. She said Amy was coherent. She said Amy was aware of where she was and what she had done. And Amy, Nurse Bay said, looked right at her and said she could not let him take the children away from her. Him. Chad, her ex-husband. That sentence, spoken to a nurse in a Louisiana hospital room the day of the killings, is essentially a confession of motive. Amy repeated similar admissions to detectives who came to question her at her bedside. Two Lafourche Parish investigators, Detective Chad Shelby and Detective Baron Cortopassi, sat with her as she described what she had done. She said she had done it to stop Chad from getting the children. Amy was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. She was initially booked into the Lafourche Parish Detention Centre in Thibodaux, but because that jail could not accommodate a female pre-trial inmate who needed ongoing medical care, she was instead held at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women, known as LCIW, in the town of St. Gabriel. That is the only state prison for women in all of Louisiana. Her bond was set at $1 million. Prosecutors announced they would be seeking the death penalty. This was the first capital murder case that District Attorney Cam Morvant had ever personally handled. The defense was led by a team of attorneys including a Texas lawyer named George Parnham, who had previously defended the famous Houston mother Andrea Yates, and 2 lawyers from the Capital Assistance Project of Louisiana, Richard Gawley and Marty Stroud. The trial began in early May 2009 at the Lafourche Parish Courthouse in Thibodaux. District Judge Jerome Barbera presided. The prosecution and defense laid out 2 completely different stories. The prosecution, led by Morvant, argued that Amy Hebert had committed a deliberate act of revenge against Chad. She had killed the 2 people on earth Chad loved the most because he was getting remarried and moving on without her. The defense, led by Parnham and Gawley, argued that Amy was severely mentally ill. They said that on the morning of August 20th, a voice, which Amy described to psychiatrists as either God or the devil, had commanded her to kill the children before Chad came to take them. The defense entered dual pleas of not guilty and not guilty by reason of insanity. They said Amy was not in her right mind when she did what she did. The jury heard 13 days of testimony. They saw the crime scene photographs. They heard from Nurse Bay. They heard from Tim Scanlon of the Jefferson Parish Crime Laboratory, who walked them through the blood evidence. They heard from Chad Hebert himself, who took the stand on May 6, 2009. Chad cried on the witness stand. He told the jury that Amy had been a devoted mother before the divorce. He said she had only become difficult, hostile, and obsessed with control after he had announced he was getting engaged to Kimberly. The prosecution showed the jury the letters she had written. Morvant put the line about buying more children up on a board for everyone to see. He pointed at it and asked the jury whether that sounded like a woman having a psychotic episode, or whether it sounded like a woman full of rage who wanted to destroy her ex-husband's life. After the prosecution rested, the defense presented its own case. They called mental health experts. They called family members and friends who took the stand and described Amy as a loving Christian woman who had been crushed by the divorce and the new relationship. The defense did not deny that Amy had killed her children. They only argued that her mind had broken that morning. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. 2 hours. In a capital murder case, where the state was asking for the death penalty, 12 people needed less than 120 minutes to reach a verdict. They rejected the insanity defense. They found Amy Hebert guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for Camille and 1 for Braxton. The next phase was the penalty phase. The same jury had to decide whether Amy would get the death penalty or life without parole. Louisiana requires a jury to be unanimous to impose death. The vote came back 9-3 in favour of the death penalty. 9 jurors wanted Amy executed, 3 did not. Because the vote was not unanimous, under Louisiana law, the death penalty was off the table. On June 24, 2009, Judge Jerome Barbera sentenced Amy Hebert to 2 consecutive life sentences in prison, without the possibility of parole, probation, or a suspended sentence. She was 42 years old. Amy was sent to LCIW in St. Gabriel, the same facility where she had been held before trial, to serve out the rest of her life. She has filed appeals. The Louisiana Supreme Court denied her in 2011. A federal appeal was denied. A post-conviction relief application was denied in 2015. Every door has been closed. She is still there today. The community of Matthews and Lockport did what small Louisiana communities do when something like this happens. they pulled together. A funeral was held for Camille and Braxton at St Hilary of Poitiers Catholic Church in Matthews. A second memorial was held at Victory of Life Church in Lockport. The two children were buried side by side at Resurrection Memorial Park in Matthews. A non-profit called the Camille and Braxton Hebert Memorial Fund was set up in their names. That fund paid for a new playground at Lockport Lower, where Braxton used to go to school and where his mother used to work. The playground was named Braxton's Buddies. At Lockport Upper, where Camille had been a student, a basketball court was built and named Camille's Court. Scholarships in the children's names were created at Nicholls State University for students going into education. The people who lost those two kids made sure the kids' names would stay on things that new children, generation after generation, would run and play and learn on. Chad Hebert married Kimberly Mendoza in 2008, about a year after the killings and about a year before the trial. The marriage Amy had tried to prevent happened anyway. The only thing Amy changed was who was and was not in it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Amy Hebert used kitchen knives because she had them in the house. The mother we are looking at next had no history of anything close to violence, and when she decided to take revenge on her ex-husband by ending the lives of her two teenage daughters, she too walked into her own kitchen and grabbed whatever was there. But where Amy attacked children who were 7 and 9, this next mother attacked two teenagers who were old enough to fight, old enough to scream, and old enough to understand exactly what their mother was doing to them. Section 6. Reka Kumari Baker. The mother who bought her murder weapons 2 days before and tired out her daughters with a shopping trip. Reka Kumari Baker was 41 years old in the spring of 2007. She was English but had been born in India in 1968. Her life, if you walked past her on the street, looked like the life of an ordinary British woman in her early 40s. She had worked as a waitress until fairly recently. She lived in a nice detached house in a small village in Cambridgeshire called Streatham, in the flat farmland country east of the city of Cambridge. She had 2 daughters. Davina was 16, Jasmine was 13. Both girls were at school. Both girls were just starting to become young women. Davina had her own Bebo page, which was the social media site teenagers used in the UK at that time, where she had posted 44 photographs of her little sister and called them her gorgeous baby sister. Jasmine had one of her own. She called Davina her gorgeous sister. The two of them had posted a close-up photograph of their hands clasped together, with the words underneath saying they would never let go. They did not let go. Their mother made sure of that. To understand how a woman goes from waitressing in a Cambridgeshire pub to butchering her 2 teenage daughters in the middle of the night, you have to go back about 20 years before any of this. Reka came to the UK from India. Around 1985, she met a local English businessman named David Baker. David was successful. He had money, he had a house, he had prospects. The two of them got married. The marriage lasted about 20 years. Davina was born. Jasmine was born. From the outside, the marriage looked like a success story. A young Indian woman, an English husband, 2 mixed-race daughters, a comfortable home in the English countryside. The image was the image of an immigrant family making it. What the image did not show was what was going on inside. By the early 2000s, the marriage had soured badly. There were fights. There were accusations. Reka's relationship with her older daughter Davina was particularly bad. In 2004, at a meeting with teachers at Davina's school, Reka said something so out of line that the teachers never forgot it. In front of the school staff, Reka looked at her own 13-year-old daughter and told her she wished she was dead. A mother saying that to a child in front of school officials is not something teachers hear every day. It was flagged. Social services in Cambridgeshire had already been involved with the family since the early 2000s because of marital breakdown and because of how poorly Reka and David were co-parenting. After the school incident, social workers kept a closer eye. At one point, according to later reports, Reka even threatened to kill Jasmine while a social worker was in the same room. Social services assessed and reassessed. They kept concluding that the bar for actually removing the children had not been met. They monitored. They kept the file open. They did what social services in the UK often do, which is tread carefully. In 2005, Reka and David divorced. At first, the split looked civil enough. Both parents said they wanted to put the girls first. But then David met a new woman. Her name was Caddy Cohn. David moved on. He looked happy. Caddy was involved in the girls' lives now. Reka could not cope with it. She hated seeing her daughters with Caddy. She hated seeing David happy. What was supposed to be a peaceful separation turned, over the next 2 years, into a bitter custody war. The war shifted around 2006, when Davina, then about 13, decided she had had enough of her mother. She asked to move in with her dad full-time. David agreed. Davina moved out. From that point forward, Davina lived with David and Caddy. Jasmine stayed with her mother. The teenage older sister and the pre-teen younger sister were now living in 2 separate houses. Reka blamed David for this. She blamed David for everything. She blamed him for the divorce, for taking her older daughter away from her, for being happy with Caddy, for moving on. Reka tried to move on too. She started a relationship with a man called Jeff Powell, who ran a furniture business. For a while, she seemed to be doing okay. She had Jeff, she had Jasmine, she had her waitressing job. Then in early 2007, 2 things happened in close succession. Jeff ended the relationship, and Reka lost her job. In the space of a few weeks, she went from a woman with a partner and a paycheck to a woman with neither. She saw David, on the other hand, with a new partner, a stable home, and her older daughter under his roof. The contrast pushed her into rage. By June of 2007, Reka had stopped thinking like a normal person who is hurting after a breakup and started thinking like someone planning something. On Monday, the 11th of June, she drove to an Asda supermarket. Asda is the British version of Walmart. She walked through the kitchen section. She picked up 2 new kitchen knives. She paid for them. She took them home. She put them somewhere inside the house where the girls would not find them. This was 2 days before the girls died. Investigators would later use that Asda purchase as proof that this was not some sudden emotional snap. This was a purchase made with a specific intention. On the 12th of June, the day before, Reka did something that looked on the surface like a nice mother-daughter outing. She took Davina and Jasmine on a shopping trip. They drove about an hour south to the Lakeside Shopping Centre, which is a big shopping mall near Thurrock in Essex. Davina was staying with her mother that weekend, which was unusual because Davina mostly lived with her father, but she had agreed to come. The 3 of them spent the day walking around shops. Prosecutors would later argue, and the judge would accept, that the shopping trip was not really about bonding. It was about wearing the girls out. Reka wanted her daughters tired. She wanted them to fall into a deep sleep when they got home that night, because what she was planning for the middle of the night required them to not wake up easily. They got back to the house in Streatham that evening. The girls went to bed in their separate rooms. At some point around 3 in the morning on Wednesday the 13th of June 2007, Reka Kumari Baker went into the kitchen, picked up the 2 knives she had bought from Asda 2 days earlier, and went upstairs. What happened in those bedrooms over the next short period of time is something that no news outlet in Britain has ever reported in full detail, and this section is not going to do it either. What is on the record is this. Davina, the 16-year-old, woke up. She fought for her life. She was found on the floor of her room, kneeling by the side of her bed, which told investigators she had tried to get up and get away. She had dozens of wounds from the 2 kitchen knives. The younger sister, Jasmine, aged 13, was found in her own bed. She had also been attacked dozens of times. By the time it was done, both girls were gone. The house was silent. Reka sat down and wrote a suicide note. The note was the kind of note a woman writes when she wants the world, after she is dead, to think of her as a victim. She wrote about her failed relationships. She wrote about being hurt. She made reference to Jeff Powell and suggested that she did not want her daughters to grow up and be hurt by men the way Jeff had hurt her. That was the line in the note, that she had done it to save them. The judge would later read that note and dismiss it for what it was. A cover. A mother does not stab her 2 teenage daughters in their beds at 3 in the morning to save them from ever feeling heartbreak. She does it for a different reason. Then Reka did something strange. She got in her car and drove away from the house. Then she came back. Then she drove away again. Then she came back again. She was circling, not sure what to do with herself. At some point that morning, after the sun came up, she picked up the phone and called a friend of hers who was a special constable with the local police. Special constables in the UK are volunteer officers. She told this friend that she had done something terrible. She told her friend that she had killed her children. Police were at the Streatham house shortly after. Just after 8 in the morning, officers went into the bedrooms upstairs and found Davina and Jasmine. Reka was arrested. She was covered in blood. She was charged with 2 counts of murder. She was held in custody. At her arraignment, she did something that her defence team would pay for later. She offered a plea. She offered to plead guilty to 2 counts of manslaughter by reason of what is called diminished responsibility. That is a British legal concept that basically says, yes, I did it, but my mental state at the time was so impaired that I did not have full responsibility. So instead of murder, it should be manslaughter. The Crown Prosecution Service took one look at the shopping trip, the Asda purchase, the suicide note, and the 2-year history of hostility toward David, and said no, this was murder. They would try her on murder. The manslaughter offer was refused. The trial was held at Cambridge Crown Court in September 2009, more than 2 years after the deaths. The prosecutor laid out the whole pattern for the jury. The 2004 moment at the school, where Reka told Davina she wished she was dead. The threat in front of the social worker about Jasmine. The Asda purchase 2 days before the killings. The shopping trip that tired out the girls. The way Davina had been found kneeling by her bed, clearly having tried to fight. The suicide note that tried to make Reka sound like the victim. And above all, the custody war with David Baker. The man she had been married to for 20 years. The man who had moved on with a new partner. The man Reka could not stand to see happy. The prosecutor told the jury this was an act of revenge. Reka had killed David Baker's 2 daughters because she wanted to destroy the happiness in his life. She wanted him to have nothing, the way she had nothing. The defence tried to stick with the diminished responsibility argument. They brought in evidence that Reka had seen a general practitioner, a family doctor named David Toes, back in 2003, and had been described as suffering from reactive stress with some mild depressive features. She had been referred to a counsellor at the time. She had never been diagnosed with any serious mental illness. There were no further medical visits for her mental health after that, really. The defence argument, in essence, was that this had been a woman who had been falling apart emotionally for years, and that the night of the 13th of June 2007 was the moment the fall hit the ground. The judge in the case was Mr. Justice Bean. He listened to the defence argument. He did not accept it. He would later call it flimsy and insubstantial. The jury did not spend long thinking about it either. On the 21st of September 2009, they retired to consider their verdict. They were back in 35 minutes, guilty on both counts of murder. Mr. Justice Bean sentenced Reka Kumari Baker to life in prison with a minimum tariff of 33 years. She would have to serve 33 years before she could even apply for parole. The BBC, reporting on the sentence in 2010, said it was one of the longest prison terms ever handed to a woman by a British court in modern times. In his sentencing remarks, Justice Bean told Reka exactly what the court thought of her motive. He said that she had wanted to retaliate against David Baker and to destroy the happiness in his life. That is the core of the case in a single sentence. He also acknowledged, honestly, that investigators had not been able to fully work out every detail of what had been going through her head. But the direction of travel, he said, was obvious. She had wanted to hurt David, and she had used Davina and Jasmine as the means of doing it. After the verdict, Cambridgeshire County Council conducted a serious case review, the same kind of review that happened after Fiona Donison and after other British cases where the state has had some contact with a family before a tragedy. The review looked at every social worker meeting, every school meeting, every moment from 2004 onward where someone outside the family had seen a warning sign. The conclusion was the same as it had been for Fiona Donison. The council said the murders could not have been prevented. Recommendations were made about better communication between schools, GPs, and social services. New procedures were put in place. Nothing on paper was going to bring Davina or Jasmine back. David Baker, the father, spoke publicly only briefly after the sentencing. He said what fathers in his situation always say, that he had lost his girls, that he would never get them back, that no prison sentence, no matter how long, would fix that. Caddy Cohn, the woman whose relationship with David had been the original trigger for so much of Reka's hatred, stood beside him. Reka had set out to make sure David and Caddy never had a happy life. She had failed at that, in the end. David and Caddy continued. The one thing Reka had taken from them, no one could give back. Reka Kumari Baker is still alive. She is still in the British prison system. Under the terms of her sentence, she will not be eligible to apply for parole until 2042, at which point she will be in her mid-70s. The 2 kitchen knives she bought from Asda on the 11th of June 2007 are in a police evidence locker. The Bebo pages Davina and Jasmine posted about each other, the ones where they wrote that they would never let go, are frozen in time somewhere in an internet archive. Neither girl ever got to turn 17. Neither girl ever got to finish school. Neither of them got to sit their exams, travel anywhere, or grow up. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Reka Kumari Baker used kitchen knives because they were the simplest thing she could buy at a supermarket. The mother we are going to look at next was a doctor. She was far more educated, far wealthier, and had access to tools most mothers on this list could never dream of. And when her marriage fell apart and her husband started seeing another woman, she did not reach for a knife. She poured fuel through the halls of her own family home in the middle of the night and set the entire thing on fire with her children still asleep in their beds. Section 7. Deborah Green, the Kansas doctor who poisoned her husband and then burned down her family home. Deborah Green was not a typical American mother. Deborah Green had a degree in chemical engineering, had gone on to medical school after that, and had become an oncologist, which is a doctor who treats cancer patients. By 1995, she was 44 years old. She had trained at one of the best medical schools in the Midwest. She had a 6-bedroom Tudor-style mansion in an upscale suburb of Kansas City called Prairie Village, on a street called Canterbury Court. Her husband, Michael Farrer, was also a doctor. He was a cardiologist, a heart specialist, who worked long hours at a hospital in North Kansas City. Between the two of them, they were earning a level of money most American families would only ever dream about. They had 3 children. Timothy was 13, Kate was 10, Kelly was 6. The family had a black Labrador named Boomer and a greyhound named Russell. From the outside, Deborah Green had the life. From the inside, by the fall of 1995, she was planning to end it in the most deliberate way she could think of, and she was going to take most of the people in that house with her. To get to how a cancer doctor ends up as one of the most infamous mothers in American criminal history, you have to go back to 1979. That is the year Deborah Green, then still a young woman, married Michael Farrer. They were both in the middle of their medical training. For the first several years, by most accounts, the marriage was functional. Michael worked. Deborah worked. They had Timothy in 1982. They had Kate in 1985. They had Kelly in 1989. At some point after Kelly was born, Deborah stopped practicing medicine. The official reason was to stay home and raise the children. The unofficial reason, according to people who worked with her and knew her, was that she was not doing well. Deborah drank. She drank heavily. She was described by nannies and family friends as a woman with a short temper, a mean streak, and a habit of humiliating her husband in front of people. One of the family's nannies later said that Deborah had told her outright that she had never even wanted children in the first place. She had only had them, Deborah said, because Michael wanted them. By 1994, the marriage was in serious trouble. There had actually been a house fire about 16 months before the fatal fire at an earlier family home. That first fire was never fully explained. The house was damaged heavily, the insurance paid out, and the family moved into another house. Investigators would later go back and take a hard look at that first fire and wonder. But at the time, no charges were ever filed, and it was filed away as an accident. In 1995, the real end of the marriage began. Michael Farrer had been away on a trip. When he came back, he reconnected with a woman named Margaret Hacker. Margaret was a registered nurse. She was attractive. She was kind. She was everything Deborah, by that point, was not. Michael and Margaret started seeing each other quietly. Deborah was not stupid. She noticed the new clothes, the new exercise equipment, the suddenly distant attitude from her husband. She knew something was going on. She moved into a separate bedroom in the house. She started drinking even more, and in July of 1995, Michael did the thing she had probably feared for a long time. He filed for divorce. What happened next is what makes this case unlike almost any other case on this list. Deborah Green was a trained scientist. She had studied chemistry before she had ever studied medicine. She had access to information about poisons, toxins, and drugs that most people do not have. She decided to use it. Starting in August of 1995, Michael Farrar started getting sick. Violently sick. He had severe stomach problems, could not keep food down, and ended up in the hospital for days at a time. The illness puzzled his doctors. He was a cardiologist at a major hospital, surrounded by experienced physicians, and none of them could figure out what was wrong with him. Michael was in and out of the hospital 3 times between August and September of 1995. Every single time his illness started up again, shortly after he had been home and had eaten food that his wife had prepared for him. It took Michael himself, lying in a hospital bed and thinking hard, to figure it out. He started reading. He researched toxic plants. He researched poisons that could cause the exact symptoms he was having. And he came across one ingredient that fit every single symptom: ricin. Ricin is a deadly toxin that is made from castor beans, which are a plant seed that you can actually buy at garden supply stores. On September the 20th, 1995, Deborah had driven to a store called Earl May in North Kansas City and had purchased packages of castor beans. She told the clerk, when asked, that she needed them for her son Timothy's school science project. Investigators later verified there was no such science project. One afternoon, while Deborah was out, Michael went through her purse. Inside, he found several packages of castor beans with the warning labels still on them. The labels warned, in plain English, that the beans could be used to make a deadly poison. That was the moment Michael Farrar knew. His own wife, the mother of his 3 children, was trying to end his life. On September the 25th, Michael called the police. He had them come to the house. He tried to have Deborah committed to a mental institution for evaluation. She was taken in, evaluated, and diagnosed with major bipolar depression with suicidal impulses. She was placed on Prozac, Tranxene, and Klonopin, 3 different psychiatric medications. After about 4 days in the hospital, she was released and came home. Michael moved out of the house for good shortly after. What Deborah did next, in those weeks of early October 1995, was start planning something bigger than the poison plot. She went to the library. She checked out several books. One was about a form of violent crime called intrafamilial homicide, which is a technical term for when one family member kills another. Another book she checked out was a novel called Necessary Lies, about an intentionally set fire that kills children. She was reading about how fires start, how they spread, and how they are investigated. Investigators would later find records of every single one of these library checkouts. On the evening of October the 23rd, 1995, Michael Farrar came to the house to pick up Timothy and Kelly for a hockey game. He dropped them back off with Deborah around 8:45 in the evening. He then went to have dinner with Margaret Hacker, his girlfriend. He left her around 11:15. Inside the Canterbury Court home, Deborah was alone with her 3 children. Timothy was 13, Kate was 10, Kelly was 6. Just after midnight, around 15 minutes past 12 on the morning of October the 24th, the house on Canterbury Court went up in flames. Deborah had poured flammable liquid through trails inside the house. Those trails, investigators would later determine, all led back to her own bedroom. She had even had one of her own robes on while setting at least one of the fires. That robe was later found in the burned-out master bathroom, burned in a way that made it clear it had been worn while someone was starting a fire. The flames spread fast. The house was fully on fire within minutes. High winds that night made it worse. The fire department responded as quickly as they could, but the house was already a wall of flame by the time they arrived. Kate Farrer, the 10-year-old, saved her own life. She was in her bedroom. She woke up in a burning house and did something very brave. She climbed out of her bedroom window. She got out onto the roof of the garage. From there, she jumped down to the ground and got away. Kate had been rehearsing for months to play the lead role of Clara in the State Ballet of Missouri's holiday production of The Nutcracker. Her body, her training, the physical skill of a young dancer is part of what allowed her to get herself out of that house. Timothy, the 13-year-old, almost made it. He got out onto a terrace of the second floor. He called down to his mother below. He asked her if he should jump, the same way Kate had. According to what Deborah later said, she told Timothy not to jump. She told him help was coming. She told him to go back inside. Timothy listened to his mother. He went back into the burning house. He never came out. He was later found on the ground floor, near the kitchen, where his body had fallen through the burned-out flooring from upstairs. Kelly, the 6-year-old, was found in her own bed where she had been sleeping. She had died of smoke inhalation. Boomer the Labrador and Russell the Greyhound died too. Deborah herself escaped. She was outside when firefighters got there. She had some hair singed off. She was not badly hurt. She told investigators she had no idea how the fire had started. She suggested at one point that maybe her son Timothy had set it. She held firm on the idea that she was a grieving mother who had lost 2 of her 3 children in a terrible accident. The Eastern Kansas Multi-Agency Task Force was called in to investigate. They were arson specialists. Within days, they had concluded that the fire had been set on purpose. There were multiple separate fires started throughout the house. The pattern of the burn was consistent with someone pouring a flammable liquid in deliberate trails. All of the trails led back to the master bedroom. The task force also called in federal help to figure out what had been wrong with Michael Farrer. A sample of his blood was sent to the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington, D.C. The result came back in November. Ricin. His body had been exposed to ricin multiple times. The poison had damaged his heart and his brain. He was going to need brain surgery to drain an infection that had formed in his head because of the poison. He was going to need heart surgery to repair the damage to his cardiac muscle. He was going to spend much of the rest of his life dealing with the consequences of what his wife had put in his food. On November the 22nd, 1995, Deborah Green dropped her surviving daughter, Kate, off at ballet practice at a theatre in Kansas City. The police were waiting. They arrested her there. She was charged with 2 counts of capital murder for the deaths of Timothy and Kelly, 2 counts of attempted capital murder for the attempted poisoning of Michael and the attempted burning of Kate, and 1 count of aggravated arson. Her bail was set at $3 million. That was the highest bail ever required by Johnson County, Kansas, up to that point. The prosecutor was Paul Morrison, the Johnson County District Attorney. He announced he would seek the death penalty. Her defense attorneys included Dennis Moore, who would later go on to be a United States congressman, and Sean O'Brien, a specialist in death penalty cases. The case drew national media coverage. True crime author Ann Rule, who had written the famous book The Stranger Beside Me about Ted Bundy, came to Kansas to cover the preliminary hearing herself. The trial was expected to be massive, with hundreds of witnesses. Deborah insisted she was innocent throughout the pre-trial phase. The trial never happened. On April 17, 1996, Deborah Green walked into court and entered what is called an Alford plea, also known as a no-contest plea, to all 5 charges. An Alford plea is when a defendant, without actually admitting guilt, agrees that the prosecution has enough evidence to get a conviction. In exchange, the state of Kansas agreed to take the death penalty off the table. Judge Peter Ruddick accepted the plea. Deborah Green was sentenced to what Kansas law calls a hard 40. That is a life sentence with no chance of parole for at least 40 years. Her parole eligibility date is November 1st, 2035. By that point, she will be 84 years old. The additional sentences for the other charges were all set to run at the same time as the main life sentence. Michael Farrer survived. By the time the case concluded, he had been through 11 separate hospitalizations and surgeries related to the ricin damage. He had pieces of skull removed to drain the brain infection. He had heart surgery. He went back to being a cardiologist at North Kansas City Hospital, where he had worked for more than 3 decades. He remarried. He tried, as he told the Kansas City Star in a 1997 interview, to simply go on with his life and stay out of the spotlight. He largely succeeded. Michael Farah passed away in August of 2023 at the age of 68. His obituary listed him as a cardiologist who had dedicated 44 years to his hospital. It barely mentioned what his ex-wife had done to him. Kate Farah grew up. She was 10 years old when she jumped from that garage roof. She is now an adult. According to published reports, she has a relationship with both of her parents. She visits her mother in prison. She has even supported some of Deborah's appeals for a new trial. The bond between Kate and Deborah is something that has surprised a lot of people who followed the case. But it is what it is. Kate is the only one of the 3 Farah children who got to grow up, and she gets to choose what to do with what remains of her family. Deborah Green is still in prison at the Topeka Correctional Facility in Kansas. She has tried, several times, to have her plea thrown out. She has hired private attorneys. She has argued that she was over-medicated on the psychiatric drugs she was on in jail when she entered her plea, and therefore was not competent to accept it. She has argued that new advances in arson investigation science have made the evidence against her less reliable than it once was. In 2015, a Johnson County judge once again rejected her latest attempt to have her sentence reduced. The judge noted that Deborah had agreed to the plea deal knowingly, that she had gotten the benefit of that deal when the death penalty was taken off the table, and that she could not now come back and try to have the deal reversed without giving that benefit back. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Deborah Green used ricin and she used fire. She had the education and the resources to choose the most scientific methods a mother has ever used against her own family. The woman we are going to look at next did not have a medical degree. She had one of the most tragic combinations of personal problems any of the mothers on this list have ever had. And when she finally decided she could not stand her life anymore, she went out to her car, drove to a gun store, bought a handgun legally, and ended the lives of her 2 teenage children in 2 separate rooms of her own Florida home. Section 8. Julie Schenecker, the Tampa military wife who bought a handgun 5 days before and planned a weekend massacre. Julie Schenecker came from a part of American society that almost never ends up in the news this way. She was a former US Army linguist. She had been fluent in Russian. She had served her country honorably, earned the rank of sergeant, and left the military to raise a family. Her husband, Parker Schenecker, was a full colonel in the US Army, a man who had done over 20 deployments in a 27-year career and who worked at United States Central Command at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa. Their family lived in an upscale neighborhood in Tampa, Florida, in the Tampa Palms area. They had 2 beautiful children. Calix was 16. She was a sophomore in the International Baccalaureate program at King High School. She ran cross-country and track. She was a published young artist. Beau was 13. He was in 8th grade at Liberty Middle School. He played soccer. Both were the kind of teenagers most parents pray for. By the end of January 2011, both of them would be dead in their own home, shot with a handgun their mother had purchased legally 5 days earlier. Julie Powers was born on the 13th of January 1961 in Muscatine, Iowa. She grew up as an athlete and played volleyball in college. She enlisted in the army as a young woman and became a Russian linguist stationed in Munich, West Germany in the 1980s. That is where she met Parker Schenecker. He was also an army officer. The two fell in love, got married, and started a military family. Calix was born in Germany. Beau was born in Hawaii. The family moved roughly every 2 or 3 years, the way most military families do. Somewhere along the way, Julie started getting sick. Not physically, mentally. She had struggled with depression since she was young, but as she got older, the condition got worse. By her 40s, she had been formally diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a serious illness where a person swings between manic highs, where they are full of energy and make wild decisions, and severe depressive lows, where they cannot get out of bed for weeks. Julie had both. During her manic phases, she would gamble thousands of dollars at Tampa's Hard Rock Casino. She would buy cars she did not need. She had told Parker she wanted to have 6 children. He had gotten a vasectomy after Beau was born. She drank heavily. By 2010, she was also abusing prescription painkillers, including oxycodone. Parker Schenecker dealt with it by doing what a lot of military men do. He worked. He deployed. He threw himself into his career. By his own admission at trial, he did not check up on his wife's medication compliance. He did not make sure she was going to her therapy appointments. He would come home between deployments, see how she was doing, and then leave again. The marriage, from the kids' point of view, was 2 parents who were present in very different ways. Their dad was disciplined and absent. Their mum was home, but often not really there. In late 2010, things got worse. Julie was becoming paranoid. She thought Parker was going to leave her. She knew he had sent an email to her family members, an email she had not been allowed to read, and in her mind, she decided it must be about divorce. Her family, she thought, was moving on without her. Her daughter Calix, who was a teenager and said teenager things, became the focus of Julie's anger. Calix did not like the food her mother cooked. She did not like the clothes her mother wore. She was embarrassed when her mother disappeared into her room for weeks. In early November 2010, Calix had made a formal child abuse complaint against Julie after Julie hit her in the face while driving home from cross-country practice. Police came to the home. Julie admitted to the officers that she had hit her daughter. No charges were filed. On the 22nd of January 2011, Julie drove to a gun store in Tampa. She picked out a .38 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver. She paid for it. Florida had a 3-day waiting period for handgun purchases, and Julie was not happy about that. She wrote in her journal that the waiting period had ruined her original plan, which was to do what she called a Saturday massacre. She also purchased hollow point ammunition. 5 days after the purchase, she would use it. During those 5 days, Julie wrote in her notebooks. She addressed her husband in one entry. She told him that he was lucky he was deployed, because if he had been home, she might have taken him out too. That single line is the reason Julie Schenecker belongs on any list of mothers who killed their children as a form of revenge against a husband. In her mind, Parker was the one abandoning her. The children, in her thinking, had become extensions of him. On the evening of Thursday, the 27th of January 2011, Julie picked up her 13-year-old son Beau to drive him home from soccer practice. Beau got into the family minivan. Julie drove. At some point during that drive, in the van, she took out the revolver and used it against her own son. She shot him twice. She then drove the rest of the way home, pulled the minivan into the garage, parked it, and left Beau inside. She went into the house. Upstairs, her 16-year-old daughter Calix was sitting at the computer, doing her homework for her International Baccalaureate program. She had no idea what had just happened in the garage. Julie walked up the stairs, into her daughter's room, and approached her from behind. According to what Julie would later write in her journal, before she did what she did, she told her daughter that she loved her. Then, with Calix facing the screen, she used the revolver. Calix was gone. What Julie did after is the part of this case that shows how much thought had gone into this. She did not run. She took Calix's body and placed it on her bed. She covered her with a blanket. She would later tell her defense attorney that she was tucking her in. She tried to do the same for Beau, but she could not get his body out of the van, so she covered him with a blanket inside the vehicle instead. She then went to the rear porch of the house. She took a massive quantity of her prescription medications. She had been planning to end her own life right alongside the children. But the combination of lithium and a blood thinner called Coumadin was not enough. She passed out on the back porch. She did not die. Parker Schenecker was at that moment on deployment in Qatar, thousands of miles away. Julie's mother Nancy was in Iowa. Julie had sent her family an email earlier that day saying she was very sick mentally. She minimally took care of the kids, and she was going to end this soon. Nancy tried to call her daughter. She could not reach her. She tried again, and again. The next morning, on the 28th of January 2011, Nancy picked up the phone in Iowa and called the police in Tampa. She asked them, please, to go do a welfare check. Tampa Police Department officers drove out to the house. They found Julie on the back porch, alive but unconscious. One officer went through the house to check on the children. He went upstairs and found Calix on her bed under the blanket. No pulse. He then opened the minivan in the garage. Bo was there under his own blanket. Officers found the Smith & Wesson box, the ammunition, and the spent shell casings. They found Julie's journal, where she had written out her plans in detail. They found a sticky note in the stairwell with a "Do not resuscitate" order she had written for herself. Julie was taken to Tampa General Hospital. The next day, she was cleared, discharged, and taken straight to Hillsborough County Jail. She was held without bail. Parker Schenecker flew home from Qatar. At a public memorial service, he spoke to the community about his children. He made a point of never mentioning his wife's name. In May of 2011, 3 months after the killings, Parker filed for divorce. He also filed a civil lawsuit against her for wrongful death, to keep her from using family money on her legal defense. He set up a charity called the Calix and Bo Schenecker Memorial Fund, giving scholarships to young athletes, artists, and leaders. Julie's trial started in late April of 2014. She pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Her defense team argued she had been in a psychotic break from bipolar disorder, made worse by alcohol and painkillers. The prosecution brought in her journal and read passages out loud in court. Prosecutor Stephen Udegawa walked the jury through every step. The handgun purchase 5 days before. The complaint about the waiting period ruining her Saturday massacre. The line to her husband saying he was lucky he had not been home. Prosecutors argued this was not a woman who had snapped. This was a woman who had been planning for months, bought the weapon deliberately, chosen the date, written it all down, and known exactly what she was doing. On the 15th of May 2014, the jury rejected the insanity defense. They found Julie Schenecker guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to 2 concurrent life sentences without the possibility of parole. She was 53 years old. She will die in a Florida prison. In 2023, a judge denied her latest request for a new trial, working through 17 separate claims one by one and rejecting every one. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Julie used a handgun. The mother we are going to look at next lived in a completely different country and came from a completely different world. She did not have the money for legal handguns, or expensive lawyers, or American suburbs. She used something cheaper and harder to detect. Something you can buy at a hardware store, something any parent gives to their children in food. Something that just needed the right dosage and the right timing to end 4 young lives. Section 9. Zinhle Maditla, the South African mother who bought rat poison at a taxi rank and used it on her 4 children. The story of Zinhle Maditla is different from every other story in this video. She was not a doctor. She was not a woman with a good job. She was not from an upscale suburb in America or England or Canada. She was a 24-year-old single mother from a poor township in South Africa, and the weapon she chose to use against her 4 small children was not a gun or a knife or fire. It was a small sachet of rat poison that she bought from a man selling it at a taxi rank for a few rand. A few rand is a small amount of South African money, the equivalent of about $1. That is how cheap and how easy and how ordinary the decision was. By the end of the day she made it, all 4 of her children were dead on a single bed in a 2-room rented house, and she had also swallowed the poison herself, but she had not taken enough to finish the job. Zinhle Maditla was born in the province of Mpumalanga in the eastern part of South Africa, roughly an hour-and-a-half drive east of Pretoria. Her life had not been easy. She dropped out of school in the 10th grade. She worked as an agent for a home shopping catalogue company called Home Choice, going door to door trying to sign up customers. Her income was commission-based and unreliable. On a good month, she made about 2,000 South African rand, which worked out to about $135 a month. She also received child support grants from the government, worth about 400 rand per child. She was raising 4 children on that kind of money, in a 2-room house that she rented in a township called Clarinet, on the outskirts of the town of Emelaleni, which used to be called Witbank. The 4 children had 3 different fathers. Her oldest was Minentle, a little girl who was 8 years old at the time of her death. Next was Blessing, a little boy of 7. Then came Schenecker, a little girl who was 4. And the youngest was Ethan, a baby boy of just 11 months. The father of the 2 youngest, Schenecker and Ethan, was a man named Mfanafuthi Shongwe. He was Zinhle's boyfriend. According to what Zinhle would later tell the court, she had been with him for about 8 years. Shongwe was the man in her life. He was the father of her 2 smallest children, and, according to Zinhle, he was also the main reason she was about to do what she was about to do. The relationship, before all of this, had been troubled for a long time. Shongwe was supposed to be helping support his children. According to him, they had broken up months earlier, in September of 2018, after arguments over the fact that the fathers of the 2 older children, Minentle and Blessing, were not paying any child support. Zinhle and Shongwe would fight over who was supporting whom. Shongwe would later tell a newspaper that Zinhle had threatened him with his own children during those fights. She was depressed, he said. She was struggling to take care of 4 small kids on almost no money, with very little help from anyone. That part everyone agreed on. Even Zinhle's own family, including her mother Beulah Martin, had been stepping in and buying the children clothes when they could. The 26th of December 2018, the day after Christmas, is the day everything came apart. In many parts of the world, the day after Christmas is a quiet day. In South Africa, it is a public holiday called the Day of Goodwill. Zinhle's 4 children had received no Christmas clothes. They had received no Christmas presents. Shongwe had promised her he would buy them Christmas clothes and had not come through. Zinhle decided that morning that she was going to go and confront him about it in person. She left her 4 children at home in the small rented room. She took a taxi, the kind of shared minibus taxi that most people in South Africa use to get around, and she headed to Shongwe's house. When she got there, she went inside. What she saw there changed everything. Shongwe was not alone. There was another woman in his bedroom. Zinhle, the mother of his 2 youngest children, the woman who had been his partner for 8 years, the woman who had just come to ask him why he had not bought Christmas clothes for their kids, was now standing in front of him and his new girlfriend. There was an argument. She left the house in tears. She made her way back to the taxi rank to catch a minibus home. At the taxi rank, she was crying, and as she was standing there, crying, she noticed a small detail that you only see in South Africa and in some other parts of the world. A man was sitting there selling small sachets of rat poison to people who wanted them for their homes. Rat poison is cheap in South Africa. You can buy it on the street, at a taxi rank, from a vendor with a plastic bag. You do not need a license. You do not need an ID. You just hand over a few coins and you walk away with a small packet of highly toxic chemicals. Zinhle bought the poison. She put it in her bag. She got into the minibus. She rode home. She walked into her rented room in Clarinet. She looked at her 4 children, and she made the decision. She went into the small kitchen area of the 2-room house. She took out bread. She took out a South African pickled relish called achar. She mixed the rat poison into the food. Then she called her children to come and eat. Minenhle, the oldest, at 8 years of age, was old enough to know what food was supposed to taste like. Blessing, the 7-year-old, was old enough too. Schenecker was 4. Baby Ethan was 11 months old and was nursed by his mother. The 3 older children sat down and ate the bread their mother had made them. The baby was taken care of separately. Some reports say Zinhle smeared poison on her breast to feed the infant, though she herself gave different versions of how she got the poison into him. Either way, within a short time, all 4 children had rat poison inside their small bodies. After they had eaten, Zinhle sat inside the house with them. Rat poison does not kill immediately. It takes time. It causes headaches, stomach pain, internal bleeding, and a slow shutting down of the body. At some point, 7-year-old Blessing complained to his mother about a severe headache. Zinhle told him she would go out and buy him some painkillers. She got up, left the house, went to a shop, bought painkillers, and came back. By the time she got back, her son was already going. She then swallowed some of the poisoned food herself. She wanted to join her children. but the amount she took was not enough. She went to sleep on the same bed with her 4 children, pulled a blanket over them, and waited. She woke up the next morning, the 27th of December 2018, still alive. Her 4 children were not. Zinhle was gone. Blessing was gone. Schenecker was gone. Baby Ethan was gone. Zinhle was the only person still breathing in that room. What she did next is what turned this case, for a lot of people who followed it, from the moment of desperate madness into something harder to forgive. She did not call the police. She did not call a family member. She did not call an ambulance. She left the house, closed the door behind her on the bodies of her 4 dead children, and went out to meet some friends. On the 27th of December and into the early hours of the 28th, Zinhle Maditla was at a friend's place drinking alcohol. She did not mention that her kids were dead. She did not mention anything. She drank, she socialized, and she came home to the house where her 4 children were still lying on the bed. She went to bed herself in that house. She got up in the morning. She went on with her day. This went on for 3 days. On the 30th of December 2018, Zinhle went to see a different friend, and at that friend's house, something broke in her. She confessed. She told her friend what she had done. The friend, understandably horrified, told Zinhle she had to go to the police. She had to turn herself in. Zinhle started walking toward the Vosman police station to do it. While she was on her way, her phone rang. It was her landlord. Her landlord said there were flies on the windows of her rented room and there was a bad smell coming out of the house. The landlord wanted to know what was going on. Zinhle told her landlord to meet her at the police station. She walked into the Vosman police station, turned herself in, and confessed to murdering all 4 of her children. Police drove to the little rented room in Clarinet. What they found inside the house, on that bed covered by a blanket, was beyond description. 4 children, aged 11 months, 4, 7, and 8, lying next to each other, gone for about 3 days. There were no stab wounds, there were no gunshot wounds, there were no bruises. The bodies were decomposing from the heat and from the time that had passed. When toxicology reports came back, they confirmed what Zinhle had already told the police. Rat poison in all 4 systems. Zinhle Maditla was charged with 4 counts of premeditated murder. She appeared at the Witbank Magistrates Court in March 2019 for a bail hearing. The investigating officer, Constable Zinhle Maditla, testified about the confession Zinhle had made. Bail was denied. The case was transferred up to the Mpumalanga High Court sitting in Middelburg for trial. When the trial began in September 2019, Zinhle did something most defendants in her situation do not do. She pleaded guilty to all 4 counts. She did not try to claim insanity. She did not try to claim she could not remember. She did not try to blame Shongwe or anybody else. She stood in the courtroom and admitted that she had intentionally and unlawfully killed her 4 children. Before her plea, she had been sent for a mental health evaluation. The examination found her fit to stand trial. She knew what she had done. She knew it had been wrong. She simply accepted the charges. During the mitigation phase of her sentencing, Zinhle gave her full account to the court. She described walking into Shongwe's room. She described seeing the other woman there. She described the taxi rank. She described the man selling the rat poison. She described coming home and preparing the food. She described Blessing complaining of a headache. She described going for painkillers. She described waking up alive. She described the 3 days of going out with friends. She described confessing to her other friend. She described walking toward the police station. She described, through tears, everything she had done. She turned to her own mother, Beulah Martin, and to the fathers of her 4 children, including Shongwe, and she said she was sorry. She said she wished she could turn back the clock. She told the court she wanted to spend the rest of her life in prison for what she had done. The prosecutor, an advocate named Nsika Mpolweni, asked the court to give her the minimum sentence, but he also pointed out an aggravating factor. Zinhle had never called for help. Not during the hours the children were dying, not in the days after. That, the prosecutor said, showed intent. On the 20th of September 2019, Judge Sekapoche Sheila Mpachlele handed down her ruling. She had considered Zinhle's guilty plea. She had considered her apology. She had considered her mental state and her poverty and her troubled relationship. But she had also considered that Zinhle had taken a long taxi ride home to cool off, had chosen to buy the poison, had chosen to prepare the food, had chosen to feed it to her children, and had then chosen to leave them dead in a locked room for 3 days while she went drinking. Judge Mpalele said in her ruling that Zinhle Maditla had been meant to nurture and protect her children, and that instead she had betrayed them. The judge sentenced her to 4 life sentences, 1 for each child. The sentences run concurrently, meaning at the same time, under South African law. But in practice, a life sentence in South Africa typically means at least 25 years before the offender can even apply for parole. Zinhle Maditla was taken from the courtroom to begin serving her sentence. Outside the court, her own mother, Beulah Martin, spoke to reporters. Beulah, having lost 4 grandchildren and now watching her own daughter be taken away for life, said something that broke a lot of people. She said, "No mother gives birth to a child and is happy when that child spends the rest of her life in a cell." She said the family would always support Zinhle. She said she hoped, one day, to see her come home rehabilitated. The 4 small bodies were buried in Mpumalanga. There was no school named after them. There was no charity set up in their honour. There was no memorial fund, because there was nobody with money to start one. Minenhle, Blessing, Shaniqua, and baby Ethan were buried by their grandmother and their extended family. Their mother was in a cell. Mfanafuti Shongwe, the man whose affair had triggered it all, did not attend. The new girlfriend Zinhle had walked in on did not attend either. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Zinhle Maditla had poison. The mother we are going to look at next used something much larger. She was a young mother from New York State, and on an April night in 2011, she buckled her 4 children into the back of a minivan, drove to the edge of the Hudson River, and pressed down on the accelerator. Her oldest boy, a 10-year-old who managed to escape, is the only reason the world knows exactly what his mother said to all of them in the seconds before the vehicle went into the water. Section 10. Lashanda Armstrong, the Newburgh mother who drove her 4 children off a boat ramp into the Hudson River. On the night of Tuesday the 12th of April 2011, at around 7:45 in the evening, Lashanda Armstrong drove her minivan off a boat ramp in the city of Newburgh, New York, and straight into the freezing cold Hudson River. She was 25 years old. In the vehicle with her were her 4 children. LaShawn Armstrong was 10, her son from a previous relationship. Landon Pierre was 5. Lance Pierre was 2. Leanna Pierre was 11 months old, 1 day away from her first birthday. The last 3 were from her relationship with her current boyfriend, a man named Jean Pierre. Within minutes, the minivan was completely submerged in roughly 8 feet of water, about 25 yards from shore. 3 of the 4 children were gone, along with their mother. The only reason the world knows exactly what Lashanda said in the back seat of that van as it sank is because her 10-year-old son LaShawn somehow found a way to live through it, climbed over his own mother, opened the driver's side window, and swam to the surface in the dark. Lashanda Armstrong's story is, in a sense, the smallest story in this video. She did not have a medical degree. She did not have a wealthy military family. She did not have journals full of detailed murder plans. She did not have a 2-year build-up of custody battles. She had a rough life, a bad relationship, a long pattern of abuse and betrayal by a man who was supposed to love her, and one very bad night. And on that night, she broke. She made a choice, and then, in the few seconds after she made it, she tried desperately to take it back. It was too late by then. Lashanda lived in a rough part of Newburgh. Newburgh is a small city on the west bank of the Hudson River, about an hour north of New York City. For decades, parts of Newburgh have had serious poverty and crime problems. Lashanda was raising 4 kids there largely on her own. The father of her 3 youngest children, Jean-Pierre, did not live with them. According to family members and neighbours, the relationship between Lashanda and Jean was rocky. A neighbour named Sharon Ramirez told the New York Times that she herself had carried on a 3-month affair with Jean, while Lashanda was pregnant with Leanna, the youngest child. Lashanda's landlord later said that Lashanda had asked him, on 2 separate occasions, to change the locks on her apartment to keep Jean out. In February 2011, just 2 months before the events of that night, Jean-Pierre had been charged by the Newburgh police with child endangerment after little 5-year-old Landon was found by police wandering the streets of Newburgh, half undressed at 1 a.m. That was the kind of family situation Lashanda was trying to hold together. Her siblings later noticed, in the weeks leading up to that April evening, that something was off. Her sister, Doris Armstrong, and her brother, Lenny Armstrong, would both tell reporters after the tragedy that Lashanda had been acting strangely. She told them she felt like somebody was watching her. She said pages of her diary were going missing. She complained that the lights in her apartment were flickering on and off, and she was constantly, almost obsessively, apologising to her siblings for things she had not even done. Doris and Lenny, looking back at that period, realised those had been cries for help they had not known how to read at the time. On the afternoon of Tuesday the 12th of April, Lashanda picked up her children from the Young and Unique Christian Development Childcare in Newburgh. A supervisor in the infant room would later tell the press that Lashanda had seemed stressed when she came in for the kids. Not angry, not wild, just tightly wound in a way that stayed with the supervisor. She took the kids home to her apartment. That evening, at around 7 p.m, an argument broke out between Lashanda and Jean-Pierre. Jean was not living at the apartment, but he was there that night. What exactly the two of them fought about has never been fully made public. The version Lashon gave later was that his mother had found out that his stepdad had been cheating on her again. Whatever it was, the argument got loud. It got physical. A relative of Lashanda's, her aunt, Angela Gilliam, was on the phone with her during part of it. Angela could hear tussling in the background. Angela was worried. At 7:45 that evening, Angela Gilliam called the Newburgh Police Department and asked them to come to Lashanda's apartment. She told them there was a domestic disturbance and there was a history of it. The police dispatched officers. While the officers were on their way, Lashanda was already moving. At 7:13 in the evening, she had already posted a message on her own Facebook page from her BlackBerry phone. The message was short. She said she was sorry to everyone. She asked everyone to forgive her for what she was going to do. She said this was it. She then packed her 4 children into her minivan. She drove. She drove about half a mile. Her destination was a public boat ramp on the Hudson River. At some point during that drive, she picked up her phone and called her own mother. She asked her mother for forgiveness. The family was still in the vehicle when she pulled up to the boat ramp. It was dark. It was rainy. The water was cold. Lashanda drove the minivan right down the ramp and straight into the river. What happened next is known because LaShawn, the 10-year-old, survived and was able to tell the people who found him. According to LaShawn, as the minivan went into the water and began to sink, his mother got out of the front driver's seat, climbed into the back, and put her arms around all 4 of her children. She told them, and he quoted her directly to a Good Samaritan named Maeve Ryan who found him minutes later, that if she was going to die, they were all going to die with her. She said this 2 or 3 times. She was gripping them as the water came up and the van went under. Then, as the cold water started to flood the inside of the vehicle, something inside Lashanda snapped the other way. She realised what she had done. According to LaShawn, his mother's voice changed. She said she had made a mistake. She said she had made a terrible mistake. She tried to throw the van into reverse and back it out of the water, but the van was already too deep. The engine was already flooded. The water was already pouring in. It was far, far too late. In those last seconds, Lashanda did 2 more things. She kissed her oldest son LaShawn on the top of his head. She gave him her blessing, and LaShawn used the window. LaShawn was the only one of the 4 children with the physical strength and the size to do it. He climbed over his mother, pulled himself to the front seat, got to the driver's side window, pushed it open, and got himself out of the van just before it went completely under. He was 10 years old. He was a small boy. He came up to the surface of the Hudson River, in the cold and the dark, and somehow got himself to the shore. He was shaking, soaking wet, and already showing signs of mild hypothermia. A woman named Maeve Ryan was driving past the boat ramp at that moment. She saw a small figure on the side of the road waving his arms. She stopped. LaShawn told her what had happened. Maeve drove him straight to the closest fire station, the Newburgh Fire Department, which was actually mostly empty at that moment because all the trucks were out on another call. Maeve and Lashanda knocked on the dispatcher's door. Lashanda, still struggling to breathe, told them his mother had driven the minivan off the ramp into the river, that his brothers and sister and mother were still inside it, and that they had to come right now. Fire Chief Michael Vatter and Newburgh Police Chief Michael Ferrara put together an emergency response. Divers went into the river. For close to an hour, they could not find the van in the dark water. Eventually, they located it, submerged about 25 yards from shore in roughly 8 feet of water. It took a heavy-duty tow truck to pull it back up the boat ramp and out onto dry land. When they opened the doors, they found Lashanda, they found Landon, they found Lance, they found baby Leanna. All 4 of them were gone. Newburgh Police Chief Ferrara told reporters the next day something very honest. He said that if Lashanda had not escaped and made it to that fire station, the family might have been reported missing, and their disappearance would likely have been treated as a missing persons case for weeks or months before anyone thought to look in the river. The minivan would have sat under that water, unnoticed, in the dark. It was Lashanda, a 10-year-old boy, who made sure the world knew what his mother had done. The aftermath was ugly in ways that family tragedies sometimes are. Jean-Pierre, the father of the 3 youngest children, gave a public statement saying that he had been unfairly portrayed as being directly responsible for the tragedy. He admitted that if he could go back, he would have done some things in his past differently. He made one more decision that split the 2 families in half. He refused to allow his 3 children to be buried in the same service as their mother. A joint funeral had been planned. Jean-Pierre pulled out and arranged a separate service for Landon, Lance and Leanna in Spring Valley, New York. Lashanda's funeral was held at the First Baptist Church in Spring Valley on the 21st of April 2011. 3 balloons, 1 for each of the 3 children she had taken with her, were released in her memory. Lashanda's family accused Jean-Pierre of keeping people off the guest list for the children's funeral a few days later. There were police at the service keeping the 2 sides of the family apart. Lashanda, the 10-year-old survivor, did not attend his siblings' funeral. His own cousin told reporters it was too much for him. He did attend his mother's. Lashanda went to live with his great-aunt Angela Gilliam, the same woman who had been on the phone during the argument and had called the police. His aunt told the press that he was doing fine, considering everything. He was starting over in a different home, under a different adult's care, with his one surviving world now down to whatever the adults around him could rebuild. 10 mothers, 10 homes, 10 moments where a woman looked at her own children and decided that the best way to hurt the man she hated was to take the people he loved most out of the world. Brandy Worley in her quiet Indiana bedroom. Jessica Edens in a parked Jeep at a speedway with a suicide note for her husband, telling him to live the rest of his life in pain. Allison McConnell leaving her wedding ring on a toilet seat beside the sons she drowned. Fiona Donison driving 90 miles through the English countryside with her dead children in sports bags to deliver them to their father. Amy Hebert writing a letter to her ex-husband, telling him to use her son and daughter's life insurance money to buy some more. Reka Kumari Baker buying the knives at Asda 2 days before she used them on 2 teenage girls who had done nothing wrong. Deborah Green lighting her own home on fire with 2 of her 3 children still asleep upstairs. Julie Schenecker writing in her journal that her husband was lucky he was not home because she would have taken him out too. Zinhle Maditla buying rat poison at a taxi rank and mixing it into her kids' dinner.
And Lashanda Armstrong, in a sinking minivan in the Hudson River, realizing 1 second too late that she had made a terrible mistake.
The pattern in all 10 cases is not complicated. It is the same pattern every single time. A relationship ended or was ending. A man had moved on or was about to. And a woman who had once loved that man, who had built a life with him, who had given him children, looked at the situation she was standing in and decided that the worst possible thing she could do to him was not to leave him, not to take him to court, not to ruin his reputation, but to take the children. The children were always the weapon. The children were always the target. The children were always the ones who paid the bill for an adult argument they did not start and could not understand. Not one of the children in any of these 10 cases did anything to deserve what happened to them. Not Tyler, not Charlie, not Hayden, Not Harper, not Connor, not Jaden, not Harry, not Elise, not Camille, not Braxton, not Davina, not Jasmine, not Timothy, not Kelly, not Calix, not Bo, not Minanlay, not Blessing, not Shaniqua, not Ethan, not Landon, not Lance, not Leanna. They were children. They were doing homework, playing soccer, going to ballet, watching movies, eating bread, sleeping in their beds. They trusted the woman who tucked them in at night, because trusting your mother is the one thing every child on earth is born believing they can do. 23 of them, across these 10 cases, found out in their last moments that the one person who was supposed to keep them safe was the person who was going to hurt them. Only a small handful survived to tell anyone about it. The rest left behind photographs, school projects, bedrooms, and quiet parents and fathers who would never fully recover. If any of these stories moved you, the best thing you can do is remember the children's names, not the mothers. The mothers get the headlines. The mothers get the books and the podcasts and the television specials. The kids get a cemetery. The kids get a memorial playground named after them at the elementary school they used to go to. The kids get, if they are lucky, a scholarship fund in their name at a state university. The adults in their lives get to carry the rest. That is the real story of what happens when a mother decides to hurt a father by hurting a child. It is not revenge. It is not justice. It is not even grief. It is the permanent removal of a small human being from the world, for the sake of a fight that small human being was never part of. 23 children, 10 mothers, 10 locked rooms, sunken cars, burning houses, and poisoned dinners. And on the other side of every one of those crime scenes, a father standing in front of a reporter, trying to find the words for something no parent should ever have to find the words for. This is what it looks like when the person who is supposed to protect a child becomes the person the child needed protection from. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.